I fainted from the summer heat in my Miami home. After I collapsed, my son chose to attend his mother-in-law's birthday party instead of helping. He left a note beside me. "You're not a baby anymore. Be independent." When I woke up, I rushed to the hospital. But when I decided to cancel the credit cards and mortgage checks, everything changed. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. The Miami heat hit me like a wall that Saturday afternoon in July. I remember thinking the air conditioner must have given up again as I struggled to fold Hugo's laundry in what used to be my own living room. At 65, my body wasn't built for this kind of humidity, but I kept going because that's what mothers do. We keep going even when everything inside us is screaming to stop. I had been living in Hugo's house for 3 years now, ever since he convinced me it would be easier for everyone if I sold my little condo and moved in with him and his wife, Patricia. "Think of all the money you'll save, Mom," he had said, with that charming smile that used to melt my heart. "And you can help us with the house payments. It's a win-win." The dizziness started while I was hanging his work shirts. My vision blurred, and suddenly the room began spinning like a carnival ride. I reached for the wall, but my legs gave out. The last thing I remembered was the taste of copper in my mouth and the sound of hangers clattering to the floor. When I opened my eyes, the sun was setting through the blinds, casting long shadows across the hardwood floor I had helped pay to install. My head throbbed, and there was a sharp pain in my ribs where I must have hit the coffee table. I called out for Hugo, then Patricia, but the house was silent except for the hum of the air conditioner that was apparently working just fine. That's when I saw it. A piece of paper torn from Patricia's monogrammed notepad, placed carefully on the coffee table next to my reading glasses. Hugo's handwriting, the same scrawl I had helped him perfect through countless homework sessions 30 years ago. "Mom, Patricia's mother's birthday party was today. Couldn't miss it. You're not a baby anymore. You can handle being independent for a few hours. There's leftover pizza in the fridge." I read it 3 times before the words sank in. He knew about his mother-in-law's party. He had probably planned to attend for weeks, but he left anyway, knowing I was home alone in this heat, at my age, with my blood pressure medication that makes me dizzy. The worst part wasn't even the abandonment. It was the tone, dismissive, irritated, like I was a burden he was tired of carrying. "You're not a baby anymore." As if needing help after collapsing in a 100-degree house was childish behavior. I sat there on that expensive leather couch, the one I had contributed $800 toward, and felt something crack inside my chest. Not my ribs, though they ached. Something deeper. Something that had been holding my world together for 65 years. All those times I had defended Hugo to my sister Margaret when she said he was selfish. "He's just busy building his life," I would tell her. "Young people today have so much pressure." All those times I made excuses when he forgot my birthday or skipped Sunday dinners I had prepared for hours. Margaret had stopped calling after I moved in with Hugo. "You're making a mistake, Hilda," she had warned me. "That boy has never appreciated what you do for him." But I thought I knew better. I thought unconditional love would eventually be returned in kind. The drive to the emergency room was a blur of traffic lights and honking horns. I kept checking my phone, hoping for a text from Hugo asking where I was. Maybe Patricia's mother would understand if he had to leave early for a family emergency. Maybe I still mattered enough for that. But the phone stayed silent. At the ER, a young nurse named Jessica took my blood pressure and asked about emergency contacts. "My son," I said automatically, giving her Hugo's number. She called 3 times. Each call went straight to voicemail. "Is there anyone else?" Jessica asked gently, and I realized with a chill that there really wasn't. I had let my friendships fade over the years, always too busy helping Hugo with something. Moving expenses when he changed apartments in college. Down payment assistance when he bought his first car. Wedding costs when he married Patricia. My social life had become an afterthought. "No," I whispered. "Just him." Dr. Martinez, a woman about my age with kind eyes, diagnosed severe dehydration and a mild concussion. "You need someone to monitor you tonight," she explained. "Head injuries can be tricky at your age. Do you have family nearby?" I thought about Hugo, probably laughing at some birthday cake right now, posting photos on that Facebook page where he never tagged me in family pictures. "He's busy tonight," I heard myself say. The doctor's expression shifted slightly. That look medical professionals get when they realize they're dealing with more than just physical symptoms. "Mrs. Rodriguez, is there someone who can stay with you? A neighbor? A friend?" I shook my head, feeling smaller than I had since I was a child. "I'll be fine. I'm used to taking care of myself." But as I signed the discharge papers and waited for my Uber, I realized that wasn't true anymore. Somewhere along the way, I had forgotten how to take care of myself. I had poured everything into taking care of everyone else, and now I was sitting in a hospital lobby at 9 o'clock on a Saturday night, completely alone. The house was dark when I got home. Hugo's BMW wasn't in the driveway. I let myself in with the key he had reluctantly given me, moving carefully through the rooms that never quite felt like home. In the kitchen, I found the leftover pizza he had mentioned, 2 cold slices in a grease-stained box, sitting next to a stack of bills he had asked me to help with this month. I didn't eat the pizza. Instead, I sat at the kitchen island, staring at those bills, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. The electric bill with my name on the account. The mortgage payment that came out of my checking account automatically each month. The credit card statement for Patricia's shopping trips, somehow connected to my excellent credit score. When had I become the person who paid for everything while being treated like an inconvenience? My phone finally buzzed at 11:30. Hugo's text was brief. "Hope you're feeling better. Patricia says hi. Home late. Don't wait up. Patricia says hi." Like I was an acquaintance they had run into at the grocery store, not the woman who had raised him, sacrificed for him, and was currently funding his lifestyle. I turned off all the lights except the small lamp in what used to be the guest room, but had become my bedroom. In the mirror above the dresser, I saw a woman I barely recognized, gray-haired, tired, invisible. When had I become so easy to dismiss? That night, lying in the bed I had bought for Hugo's guest room, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out exactly where my money was going, and more importantly, I was going to find out who I had become in the process of losing myself. The woman who collapsed in the heat was tired and grateful for any crumb of attention, but the woman who woke up the next morning was someone else entirely, someone who was about to ask questions that should have been asked years ago. The next morning, Hugo acted like nothing had happened. He breezed into the kitchen at 7:30, already dressed for his job at the accounting firm, grabbing coffee and toast like it was any other Sunday morning. "Morning, Mom," he said without looking at me, scrolling through his phone. "Patricia's still sleeping. Her mother's party went pretty late." I stood at the sink, washing the dishes from dinner I had made for myself the night before, waiting for him to ask how I was feeling, waiting for an apology, or even just acknowledgement of what had happened. Instead, he grabbed his keys and headed for the door. "Hugo," I called after him, my voice steadier than I felt. "We need to talk." He paused, checking his expensive watch, the one I had bought him for his 30th birthday. "Can it wait? I'm meeting Marcus for golf, and you know how he gets when people are late." Something cold settled in my stomach. Marcus, his college friend who had never worked a day in his life but somehow owned 3 cars. The same Marcus who always seemed to have expensive vacation photos on social media, while Hugo complained about money troubles. "I collapsed yesterday," I said quietly. "I was unconscious for hours." Hugo finally looked at me, and for a moment, I saw something flicker across his face. Guilt, maybe. Or just irritation at having his schedule disrupted. "Yeah, sorry about that. Patricia really wanted me at her mom's thing. You understand, right? Family obligations." Family obligations. The irony wasn't lost on me. After he left, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and Hugo's laptop, which he had left behind in his rush. He had asked me to handle some of his personal banking online a few months ago, claiming he was too busy with work. "You're so much better with this stuff than I am, Mom," he had said. At the time, I felt useful, important. Now I wondered what else I might find. I logged into the bank account we shared for household expenses, the one where my Social Security and pension payments were automatically deposited. The balance should have been around $3,000, enough to cover the monthly bills with some left over for groceries and my medications. Instead, I found $237. My hands started shaking as I scrolled through the transaction history. Automatic payments to Hugo's personal credit card, transfers to accounts I didn't recognize, cash withdrawals that I certainly hadn't made, hundreds of dollars disappearing every week, sometimes more. I opened a new tab and logged into my personal savings account, the one I had built over 40 years of working as a school secretary. The account that was supposed to have enough money to ensure I would never be a burden to anyone. $15,000. It should have been $42,000. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers, crashing to the tile floor Patricia had insisted on installing. I barely noticed the brown liquid spreading across the expensive white stone as I stared at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Someone had been making regular transfers from my savings, large amounts. The most recent was just 2 weeks ago. $4,000 moved to something called Rodriguez Family Trust. I had never heard of any family trust. My chest felt tight, like the air was being slowly squeezed out of my lungs. This wasn't possible. Hugo wouldn't. He couldn't. But the numbers didn't lie. I spent the next hour going through every statement, every transaction, building a picture that made my stomach turn. Hugo had been systematically draining my accounts for over 2 years. Not just the household money, but my retirement savings, my emergency fund. The money I had set aside for my own funeral someday, so I wouldn't be a financial burden even in death. The amounts were carefully calculated, never enough to trigger overdraft fees or obvious red flags, but consistent, relentless, like water slowly wearing away stone. I heard Patricia's heels clicking on the stairs and quickly closed the laptop. She appeared in the kitchen doorway wearing a silk robe that cost more than my monthly medication budget. Her blonde hair perfectly styled even though she had just woken up. "Morning, Hilda," she said with that bright smile that never reached her eyes. "Thanks for cleaning up the mess from yesterday. I told Hugo you'd handle it." The mess from yesterday. My collapse, my trip to the emergency room, my night spent alone and scared. Just a mess to be cleaned up. "Patricia," I said carefully, "do you know anything about a Rodriguez family trust?" Her smile faltered for just a second, so briefly I might have imagined it. "Oh, that's just some financial planning thing Hugo set up. Tax purposes, you know how complicated all that stuff is." She moved to the coffee maker, her movements casual, but I caught the way her shoulders tensed. "Why do you ask?" "Just curious. I saw it on a bank statement." Patricia poured herself coffee in the expensive mug she had special ordered, the one with her monogram in gold letters. "Hugo handles all the financial stuff. I don't really pay attention to the details." She laughed, a sound like wind chimes in a storm. "Men and their money schemes, right? As long as the bills get paid, I don't ask questions. As long as the bills get paid. With my money. My life savings that I had earned through decades of getting up at 6 in the morning, dealing with difficult parents and administrators, saving every penny I could." After Patricia disappeared back upstairs, I sat alone in the kitchen that I helped buy, surrounded by furniture I helped pay for, in a house where I was treated like a live-in servant. But now I knew something they didn't realize I knew. I knew about the money. The question was, what else didn't I know? That afternoon, while Hugo was still playing golf and Patricia was getting her nails done, I went through the house with new eyes. The master bedroom with the king-size bed I had contributed $800 toward. The walk-in closet filled with Patricia's designer clothes, many of them charged to credit cards linked to my accounts. The bathroom renovation I had funded after Hugo claimed they needed help with just the down payment. In Hugo's home office, I found file cabinets that were supposed to contain important family documents, birth certificates, insurance policies, the deed to the house. But when I looked for anything with my name on it, I found mostly empty folders and evasive paperwork. The house deed was particularly interesting. According to the documents, Hugo was the sole owner. My name appeared nowhere, despite the fact that I had been making the mortgage payments for 3 years. I sat in his leather desk chair, another purchase I had helped finance, and felt the last of my illusions crumble. This wasn't just financial assistance between family members. This was something else entirely. My phone rang, making me jump. Margaret's name appeared on the screen, my sister who I hadn't spoken to in months. "Hilda, I've been thinking about you. How are things?" For a moment, I almost said fine out of habit. The automatic response of a woman who had spent decades pretending everything was perfect. But something in Margaret's voice, a gentleness I had forgotten existed, made the truth come spilling out. "Margaret, I think I'm in trouble." There was a pause. "What kind of trouble?" I looked around Hugo's office, at the expensive electronics and furniture that my money had bought, in a house where I apparently had no legal claim despite funding it. The kind where I don't know how it happened, but I think I've been paying for my own disappearance. Margaret was quiet for a long moment. "Hilda, where are you right now?" "In Hugo's house. I don't know what to call it anymore." "Listen to me carefully," Margaret said, her voice taking on the protective tone I remembered from our childhood. "Can you get to my house? Today?" I thought about Hugo's reaction if he came home and found me gone, the guilt trips, the accusations of being dramatic, the way he would twist this into somehow being my fault. Then I thought about the missing $27,000. "Yes," I said. "I can get there today." As I hung up, I heard Hugo's car pulling into the driveway. I quickly closed the file cabinet and walked back to the kitchen, moving like I was just a harmless old woman going about her day. But inside, something was awakening. Something that had been dormant for too long, buried under years of giving and accommodating and making excuses. Hugo walked in with his golf clubs, whistling and relaxed. "Hey, Mom, great day on the course. What's for dinner?" I looked at him, this man I had raised and loved and sacrificed for, who had been systematically stealing from me while treating me like an unwelcome guest in a house I was paying for. "I'm not sure yet," I said calmly. "I might go visit Margaret tonight." His expression shifted slightly. "Margaret? Why?" "Just to catch up. It's been too long." Hugo frowned, and for the first time, I realized he didn't like the idea of me talking to my sister. I wondered how long he had been subtly discouraging those conversations, keeping me isolated and dependent. "Well, don't stay too late," he said. "You know how you get confused driving at night." Confused. Another little dig. Another way of making me feel incompetent and grateful for his protection. "I'll be fine," I said. "After all, I'm not a baby anymore." The words hung in the air between us, and I saw recognition flicker in his eyes. He remembered the note. He just hadn't expected me to remember it, too. That evening, as I drove to Margaret's house with a folder full of bank statements hidden in my purse, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. I felt dangerous. Margaret's house felt like stepping into a forgotten world. Warm lamplight, family photos covering every surface, the smell of her famous pot roast filling the air. I had forgotten what it felt like to be genuinely welcomed somewhere. "You look exhausted," Margaret said, taking my coat and guiding me to her kitchen table. "When's the last time you had a decent meal?" I couldn't remember. For months, I had been eating whatever Hugo and Patricia left behind, grateful for scraps in a house I was funding. Margaret placed a full plate in front of me and sat down with her own, watching me with concerned eyes. "Now tell me what's happening." I spread the bank statements across her dining table like evidence in a crime scene, which I was beginning to realize might be exactly what they were. Margaret put on her reading glasses and studied each document carefully, her expression growing darker with every page. $27,000, she whispered. "Hilda, this is theft." "It's my son," I said, the words feeling foreign in my mouth. "Family doesn't steal from family." Margaret looked up at me with a mixture of pity and frustration. Family also doesn't abandon their mother during a medical emergency. Family doesn't leave cruel notes when someone collapses from heat exhaustion. She pointed to a series of transfers from 6 months ago. "Look at this pattern. Every 2 weeks, like clockwork. This isn't someone borrowing money in an emergency. This is systematic." I stared at the numbers, trying to find some innocent explanation. Maybe he was planning to pay it back. Maybe he just needed help getting established. For 2 years? Margaret's voice was sharp. Hilda, look at these dates. This started right after you moved in with them. The moment they had access to your accounts, the pot roast turned to ash in my mouth. I had been so proud when Hugo asked me to move in, so grateful to feel needed again. He said it would help everyone save money. It helped him, all right. Margaret gathered the statements into a neat pile. What exactly have you been paying for in that house? I started listing everything, and with each item, Margaret's face grew more grim. The mortgage payment of $2,300 a month, the utilities averaging $400, the credit card payments that seemed to grow every month, the car payment for Patricia's BMW, the membership to the country club where Hugo played golf. The house is in his name only. I added quietly, I found the deed. Margaret was quiet for a long moment, studying my face. Hilda, do you know what equity stripping is? I shook my head. It's when someone systematically drains the financial resources of another person, usually someone vulnerable or trusting. They isolate the victim, gain control of their finances, and slowly transfer everything into their own accounts. My hands started shaking again. But it's Hugo. I raised him. I sacrificed everything for his education, his future. And he knows that, Margaret said gently. That's exactly why this works. Your love for him makes you easy to manipulate. She reached across the table and took my hand. When's the last time he did something for you? Not something you asked for or that benefited him too. Something just because he loves you. I sat there in Margaret's warm kitchen, trying to remember a single instance in the past 3 years. Hugo bringing me soup when I was sick. Hugo asking about my day. Hugo showing interest in anything about my life that didn't involve my bank account. The silence stretched on until Margaret squeezed my hand. That's what I thought. That night I slept in Margaret's guest room under a quilt our grandmother had made, in a bed that no one resented me for occupying. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking up anxious about bills or feeling guilty about taking up space. In the morning, Margaret made pancakes and strong coffee, and we continued going through my financial records. What we found was worse than I had imagined. Look at this, Margaret said, pointing to a credit card statement I hadn't seen before. This card is in your name, but look at the charges. Expensive restaurants I had never been to. Shopping trips to stores I couldn't afford. A weekend getaway to Key West that I had never taken. The balance was $8,400, and the minimum payments were being automatically deducted from my checking account. I never applied for this card, I whispered, but someone with access to your personal information did. Margaret's jaw was tight with anger. Someone who knew your social security number, your maiden name, your date of birth. The room felt like it was spinning. Patricia, she handles all the mail. She said it was to help me stay organized. Margaret stood up abruptly and started pacing. Hilda, this isn't just Hugo taking advantage. This is fraud, identity theft. They've been using your credit to fund their lifestyle while making you feel grateful for their help. I thought about all the times Patricia had offered to handle the boring financial stuff for me. How she had convinced me to set up automatic payments so I wouldn't have to worry about due dates. How she had suggested combining accounts to make everything simpler. There's more, Margaret said grimly, pulling out another statement. This is from a loan company. $15,000 borrowed against your name, using the address of Hugo's house. The kitchen went silent, except for the ticking of Margaret's old clock. $15,000. Money I had never seen, never agreed to borrow, but was apparently responsible for paying back with interest. I don't understand, I said, my voice barely a whisper. Why would they do this to me? Margaret sat back down and took both my hands in hers. Because they could. Because you trusted them completely, and they used that trust as a weapon. She pulled out her phone. We're calling the police. No! The word came out sharper than I intended. Margaret, please, he's still my son. A son who has stolen over $50,000 from you. A son who left you unconscious on the floor while he went to a birthday party. Margaret's voice was hard. A son who has been systematically destroying your financial future while you thanked him for letting you live in a house you're paying for. I started crying then, ugly tears that had been building up for years. Not just for the money, though that was devastating enough. For the realization that the person I loved most in the world saw me as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. He used to bring me flowers when he was little, I sobbed. Every Mother's Day, he would pick dandelions from the yard and present them to me like they were roses. He was so proud. Margaret held me while I cried, and when the tears finally stopped, she spoke quietly. That little boy might have grown into a good man, but this Hugo, the one who's been stealing from you, isn't that child anymore. He's someone who sees your love as weakness. That afternoon, we called my bank and placed fraud alerts on all my accounts. We requested detailed records of every transaction for the past 3 years. We contacted the credit card companies about the cards I hadn't applied for. With each phone call, the picture became clearer and more horrifying. Hugo and Patricia had been using my identity to live far beyond their actual means, sticking me with the bills while treating me like an unwelcome burden. There's something else, Margaret said, as we waited for the bank records to be emailed over. Where do you think they were planning for this to end? I looked at her, confused. Think about it, Hilda. They can't keep draining your accounts forever. Eventually, you'd run out of money or figure out what was happening. So what was their exit strategy? A cold dread settled in my stomach. I don't know. I think they were waiting for you to die, Margaret said bluntly. Think about how they treat you. The stress, the isolation, the way they make you feel like you're losing your mind. They were waiting for nature to take its course, and then they'd inherit whatever was left while walking away from all the debt they created in your name. The thought was so monstrous I couldn't process it at first. But then I remembered Hugo's reaction when I mentioned visiting Margaret. The way he discouraged me from seeing doctors unless absolutely necessary. How he and Patricia often talked about my health problems in front of me like I wasn't there. They were killing me slowly, I said, the words sounding surreal even as I spoke them. With stress and isolation and making me feel worthless. Margaret nodded grimly. And when you finally died from the strain of supporting their lifestyle, they'd play the grieving son and daughter-in-law, probably throw you a nice funeral with your own money, and walk away free and clear. My phone rang. Hugo's name on the screen, probably wondering why I hadn't come home to make dinner or do laundry or transfer more money into his accounts. For the first time in 3 years, I let it go to voicemail. What are you going to do? Margaret asked. I stared at my phone, then at the pile of evidence spread across the table. Bank statements, credit reports, loan documents, a paper trail of betrayal that went back years. I'm going to disappoint them, I said, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice. Margaret raised an eyebrow. They're expecting me to come crawling back, grateful and apologetic for causing trouble. They're expecting me to keep funding their lives while accepting whatever crumbs of affection they throw my way. I stood up, feeling stronger than I had in years, but I'm not going back, and I'm not dying quietly so they can profit from my corpse. I'm going to do something they never expected from their docile, grateful mother and mother-in-law. Margaret smiled, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her since I arrived. What's that? I'm going to fight back. The confrontation came sooner than I expected. I had been staying at Margaret's for 3 days when Hugo showed up on her doorstep, his face a mask of wounded concern that I now recognized as practiced manipulation. Mom, thank God, he said, pushing past Margaret into the living room. I've been so worried. You just disappeared without telling anyone where you were going. I stayed seated on Margaret's couch, surrounded by the financial documents that told the real story of our relationship. I left you a note, I said calmly, just like you did for me. His eyes flickered to the papers spread across the coffee table, and I saw something change in his expression. The mask slipped just enough to reveal calculation beneath the concern. What's all this? He asked, gesturing to the bank statements. $27,000, I said simply. That's how much has disappeared from my savings account over the past 2 years. Hugo laughed, but it sounded forced. Mom, you're confused. That money went to household expenses, remember? You agreed to help with the bills. The mortgage payment is $2,300 a month, I continued, ignoring his interruption. The utilities average $400. That's $32,400 a year. But you've taken over $60,000 from my accounts. Margaret stepped forward with a credit card statement. And what about this? $8,400 charged to a card she never applied for, at restaurants she's never been to, for trips she never took. Hugo's face flushed red. There must be some mistake. Identity theft, probably. We should report it. We did, I said. The credit card company is very interested to learn that the card was applied for using the computer at your house, from your IP address, while I was grocery shopping. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Hugo looked from me to Margaret and back again, his charming mask completely gone now. What I saw underneath made my stomach turn. Cold calculation, anger at being caught, and underneath it all, contempt. You know what? Hugo's voice changed, becoming harder. Fine. Yes, I used some of your money, but look at what you got in return. A place to live, meals, companionship. Do you have any idea how much it would cost to put you in a decent retirement home? Margaret gasped. But I felt oddly calm. This was the truth finally coming out. So you stole from me to save money on my care? I didn't steal anything, Hugo snapped. You live in my house, you eat my food, you use my utilities. That money was payment for services rendered. Services rendered. I repeated the words slowly. Is that what you call abandoning me when I collapsed? Is that what you call leaving cruel notes when I nearly died from dehydration? Hugo's jaw tightened. You're being dramatic. You were fine. You always are. I spent 4 hours unconscious on your living room floor while you were at a birthday party. Patricia's mother is important to our social circle. You wouldn't understand the pressures we're under, the image we have to maintain. Margaret made a disgusted sound. Image? You're maintaining your image with her money while treating her like garbage. Hugo turned on Margaret with surprising viciousness. This is none of your business. You've been poisoning her against me, filling her head with paranoid fantasies. The bank records aren't fantasies, Margaret shot back. The fraudulent credit cards aren't fantasies. The loan you took out in her name isn't a fantasy. Hugo went very still. What loan? I pulled out the loan documents Margaret had found. $15,000 from Premier Financial. Borrowed against my credit, but somehow the money never made it to my account. For the first time, Hugo looked genuinely shaken. Mom, I can explain that. Please do. He ran his hands through his hair, the same gesture he'd used as a child when caught lying about homework. Patricia and I were having some cash flow problems. My commissions at work weren't what they used to be, and she had some medical expenses from her surgery. What surgery? Hugo's face reddened again. The cosmetic procedures. Her nose and the breast augmentation. It wasn't covered by insurance. I stared at him. You took out a loan in my name to pay for Patricia's plastic surgery? It was supposed to be temporary. We were going to pay it back as soon as my next big commission came through. Margaret laughed bitterly. When was that supposed to happen? After you'd drained her completely dry? Hugo turned to me, and for a moment I saw a flash of the manipulative child he'd been. Mom, you have to understand. We were desperate. The mortgage, the car payments, the country club membership I need for networking. Everything costs so much more than we expected. So you decided I should pay for it. You weren't using that money anyway. It was just sitting in savings, earning nothing. At least this way, it was helping family. The casual cruelty of it took my breath away. My life savings, accumulated through decades of careful budgeting and sacrifice, dismissed as money I wasn't using anyway. And the plan was what exactly? I asked quietly. Keep draining my accounts until I had nothing left? Hugo looked uncomfortable. We figured. We hoped. You wouldn't live long enough for it to matter. Margaret shot up from her chair. Get out. Get out of my house right now. But I held up a hand. No, let him finish. I want to hear this. Hugo looked trapped, but he'd gone too far to back down now. You're 75, Mom. Statistically, you don't have many years left. And when you die, the debts die with you. We'd inherit whatever assets were left, and the credit card companies would just have to write off the losses. 75? I said. Hugo, I'm 65. He blinked. What? I'm 65 years old. I could easily live another 20 or 25 years. Were you planning to keep stealing from me for 2 more decades? The realization hit him like a physical blow. I could see him doing the math, understanding for the first time that his plan was completely unsustainable. We didn't think. We figured you'd want to help us get established. By committing identity theft and fraud? It's not fraud when it's family, Hugo said desperately. You raised me. You owe me. The words hung in the air like poison gas. Margaret looked like she wanted to hit him, but I felt something else entirely. A profound sadness for the man my son had become. I owe you, I repeated. I see. I stood up slowly, gathering the bank statements and credit reports. Hugo, do you know what I was doing the day before I moved in with you? He looked confused by the change of subject. I don't know. Packing? I was at my financial advisor's office, reviewing my retirement portfolio. Do you know what he told me? Hugo shook his head. He told me I had enough saved to live comfortably for the rest of my life, even if I lived to be 100. He congratulated me on being so responsible, so prepared. I smiled, but there was no warmth in it. I was proud of myself. I thought I had done everything right. I moved toward the door, and Hugo instinctively stepped aside. But you saw that financial security as something that belonged to you. Not something I had earned, but something you were entitled to inherit early. Mom, that's not... You and Patricia have stolen approximately $60,000 from me in 2 years. At that rate, you would have bankrupted me completely within 4 years, leaving me destitute and dependent on whatever charity you felt like providing. Hugo's face had gone pale. We would have taken care of you. The way you took care of me when I collapsed? The way you take care of me now? Letting me live in a house I'm paying for while treating me like an unwelcome guest? Margaret opened the front door. I think it's time for you to leave. Hugo looked at me desperately. Mom, please. We can work this out. Come home and we'll sit down and make a plan. Maybe set up a budget or something. A budget, I said softly. Yes, I think it's time for a budget, but not the kind you're thinking of. Hugo frowned. What do you mean? I mean I'm cutting off your allowance. I walked past him toward Margaret's car, leaving him standing in the doorway with his mouth open. Mom, you can't be serious. Where are you going to live? What are you going to do? I turned back to look at him one last time. I'm going to do something I should have done years ago. I'm going to live my own life with my own money. As Margaret drove me away, I saw Hugo in the rearview mirror, standing on the porch with his phone pressed to his ear. Probably calling Patricia to report that their financial plan had just collapsed. Are you okay? Margaret asked quietly. I thought about the question seriously. My son had stolen from me, lied to me, and planned to continue exploiting me until I died. The people I had trusted most in the world had betrayed me in the cruelest possible way. But for the first time in years, I knew exactly where I stood and what I was dealing with. I'm getting there, I said. Margaret glanced at me in the mirror. Where to now? I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found a number I hadn't called in over a year. My old financial advisor. First, we're going to see about getting my money back. Then we're going to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Margaret smiled grimly. I like the sound of that. As we drove through the Miami traffic, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades. I felt powerful. Not because I was angry, though I was. Not because I wanted revenge, though part of me did. I felt powerful because I finally understood the game that had been played against me, and now I was going to change the rules. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in patience. While Hugo and Patricia frantically called and texted, alternating between guilt trips and threats, I quietly worked with Margaret and my financial advisor to unravel the web they had woven around my life. My advisor, Robert Chen, was a soft-spoken man in his 50s who had managed my retirement accounts for over a decade. When I explained what had happened, his usual calm demeanor cracked. $60,000, he said, reviewing the statements spread across his conference table. Mrs. Rodriguez, this is elder abuse. We need to contact the authorities immediately. Not yet, I said. I want to understand the full scope first, and I want to make sure they can't do this to anyone else. What we discovered over the following days was even worse than I had imagined. Hugo and Patricia hadn't just stolen from me, they had created an entire false identity around my financial life. The Rodriguez family trust that Patricia had mentioned so casually turned out to be a shell entity they had established using my social security number. They had been funneling money through it to avoid detection, creating fake expenses and phantom investments that existed only on paper. Look at this, Robert said, pointing to a series of transactions from 8 months ago. They claimed to be investing $12,000 of your money in municipal bonds, but the bonds don't exist. The money went directly into Hugo's personal account. Margaret leaned forward. Can we trace where it went from there? Robert pulled up more records. Luxury car lease payments, high-end restaurants, a vacation rental in the Bahamas last Christmas. He looked at me over his reading glasses. While you were home alone, weren't you? I nodded. They had told me the trip was a work conference that spouses weren't allowed to attend. I had spent Christmas Day watching old movies and eating frozen dinners. Grateful they had at least left me some food in the refrigerator. There's more, Robert continued. They've been using your excellent credit score to secure loans and credit lines, then defaulting on payments just before they would affect your credit rating. It's sophisticated financial abuse. The most chilling discovery came when we reviewed my health insurance records. Hugo had been listed as my emergency contact and healthcare proxy, which gave him access to my medical information. But he had also signed me up for several supplemental insurance policies without my knowledge. These are policies that pay out upon death, Robert explained gently. The premiums have been automatically deducted from your checking account for 18 months. Margaret's face went white. They were betting on her dying. More than that, Robert said grimly. Look at the beneficiaries. Hugo and Patricia were listed as the sole beneficiaries on policies worth over $200,000. Money they would collect when I died. Paid for with premiums stolen from my own accounts. I sat in Robert's office, surrounded by evidence of the most intimate betrayal imaginable, and felt a cold clarity settle over me. This wasn't just greed or desperation. This was calculated cruelty, planned over months and years. What are our options? I asked. Robert exchanged glances with Margaret. We can pursue criminal charges for elder abuse, identity theft, and fraud. We can work to recover the stolen funds through civil litigation. And we can put protections in place to prevent future abuse. How long would that take? Criminal charges? Could be months or years. Civil recovery? Even longer. And there's no guarantee they have assets to recover. I thought about Hugo and Patricia, probably panicking right now about their missing cash cow. They would be scrambling to figure out how to maintain their lifestyle without my constant financial support. I want to do something else first, I said. Margaret frowned. What do you mean? They've spent 2 years playing a game where I didn't know the rules. Now I want to play a game where they don't know the rules. That afternoon, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I went shopping for myself. Not for groceries or household supplies that Hugo and Patricia would use, but for clothes that made me feel confident, a haircut that made me look younger, small luxuries I had denied myself while funding their extravagant lifestyle. At the salon, as the stylist trimmed away years of neglect, I called Hugo. Mom! His voice was tight with barely controlled panic. Where have you been? We need to talk. Hello, Hugo. I'm having a wonderful day. How are you? The question clearly threw him off balance. I'm fine. Listen, about the other day, I think there were some misunderstandings. Oh, no misunderstandings at all. Everything is perfectly clear now. A pause. What do you mean? I mean, I understand our relationship much better now. You see me as a source of income, not as your mother. That's valuable information. Mom, that's not true. We love you. I watched in the salon mirror as the stylist shaped my hair into something elegant and contemporary. Do you know what love looks like, Hugo? Of course I do. Love looks like checking on someone when they collapse. Love looks like including someone in family decisions. Love looks like being honest about finances. I tilted my head as the stylist made final adjustments. What you and Patricia have shown me isn't love. It's exploitation. Hugo's voice became pleading. Mom, please come home. We can work this out. I am home, Hugo. For the first time in 3 years, I'm exactly where I belong. I hung up before he could respond and turned off my phone. In the mirror, I saw a woman I barely recognized. Confident, dignified, free. Over the next week, I began implementing my plan. While Hugo and Patricia assumed I was hiding out at Margaret's, feeling sorry for myself, I was actually taking back control of my life in ways they couldn't imagine. First, I changed all my banking passwords and removed Hugo's access to every account. I set up new accounts at a different bank entirely, one they had never heard of. Second, I met with an estate planning attorney to revise my will. The previous version had left everything to Hugo, with the assumption that he would take care of me in my old age. The new version was very different. Third, I began documenting everything. Not just the financial abuse, but the emotional manipulation, the isolation tactics, the systematic way they had undermined my confidence and independence. The breakthrough came when I realized something crucial. They needed me more than I needed them. Without my monthly contributions, Hugo and Patricia couldn't afford the house they lived in. The mortgage payment alone was more than Hugo's actual salary, and Patricia had never worked a day in her life. The country club membership, the luxury cars, the designer clothes, all of it depended on my continued financial support. But they didn't know I had figured this out yet. I started leaving subtle signs that I was weakening, calling Margaret from a different phone to complain about feeling lonely and uncertain, making sure Hugo's friends saw me at places where I looked confused and vulnerable. The key was making them think their plan was working, that the isolation and financial stress were breaking me down, making me desperate to return to their controlled environment. Patricia took the bait first. She showed up at Margaret's house with tears in her eyes and a story about how much Hugo missed me, how guilty he felt about our misunderstanding, how much they both wanted me to come home. "Hilda, honey, Hugo's been beside himself," she said, clutching my hands with perfectly manicured fingers. "He realizes he made some mistakes with the money situation. We want to make it right." I let myself look fragile and uncertain. "I don't know, Patricia. I've been so confused about everything." "Of course you have, sweetie. That's why you need family around you, people who understand you and can help you make good decisions." Margaret, who was in on my plan, played her part perfectly. "Maybe you should consider it, Hilda. You have seemed a little lost lately." Patricia's eyes lit up. "Exactly. And Hugo has some wonderful ideas about how to manage your finances better. More structured, you know, less complicated." More controlled, she meant. They wanted to formalize the arrangement that had been bleeding me dry, probably with legal documents that would give them permanent access to my accounts. "I suppose I could think about it," I said hesitantly. Patricia practically glowed with triumph. "Oh, Hilda, that's wonderful. Hugo will be so relieved. Why don't you come for dinner tomorrow night? We can all sit down and work everything out." After she left, Margaret looked at me with concern. "Are you sure about this? Going back into that house feels dangerous." I smiled, feeling more confident than I had in years. "Don't worry. I'm not the same woman who collapsed in their living room 2 weeks ago. What are you planning?" I looked out Margaret's window toward the setting sun, thinking about Hugo and Patricia celebrating what they thought was their victory. "I'm planning to give them exactly what they deserve," I said. "And what they deserve is the truth about who they've been dealing with all along." The next evening, as I prepared to walk back into the house I had been paying for, I felt a strange sense of anticipation. Hugo and Patricia thought they were welcoming back their defeated cash cow. Instead, they were about to meet someone they had never seen before, a woman who finally understood her own power and wasn't afraid to use it. The house looked exactly the same when I walked through the front door that evening, but everything felt different. Hugo and Patricia had clearly spent the day preparing for my return. The living room was spotless. Candles flickered on the dining table, and the smell of my favorite pot roast filled the air. "Mom!" Hugo embraced me with what looked like genuine relief. "I'm so glad you're home." Patricia appeared from the kitchen wearing the apron I had bought her last Christmas, playing the role of devoted daughter-in-law. "Hilda, honey, I made all your favorites. I hope you're hungry." I smiled and let them fuss over me, taking my coat and guiding me to the dining room where an elaborate meal was laid out. For a moment, I almost felt guilty about what was coming. They were trying so hard to recreate the illusion of a loving family, but then I noticed the stack of papers beside Hugo's plate, and my resolve hardened. During dinner, they kept the conversation light and cheerful. Hugo talked about work. Patricia shared gossip about the neighbors, and both of them asked repeatedly how I was feeling, whether I needed anything, if I was comfortable. The performance was flawless, except for one thing: their eyes. Hugo kept glancing at those papers, and Patricia's smile was too bright, too practiced. They were waiting for something. After dessert, Hugo cleared his throat. "Mom, we wanted to talk to you about some ideas we've had. Ways to make things easier for everyone. Here it comes," I thought. Patricia leaned forward eagerly. "We know the past few weeks have been stressful, with all that confusing financial stuff. We thought it might help if we simplified things." Hugo pushed the papers toward me. "We've been working with a financial planner, someone who specializes in senior financial management. He's put together a comprehensive plan that would take all the burden off your shoulders." I picked up the documents, scanning them quickly. It was even worse than I had anticipated. They wanted me to sign over power of attorney for all financial decisions, transfer ownership of my remaining assets to the Rodriguez family trust, and agree to a monthly allowance of $800 for my personal expenses. $800. Less than what they spent on Patricia's monthly salon appointments. "This is very thorough," I said mildly. Patricia beamed. "Isn't it wonderful? You'd never have to worry about bills or investments or any of that complicated stuff again. We'd handle everything. And what would happen to my savings? My retirement accounts?" Hugo's expression became serious and professional. "Everything would be managed for maximum growth and security. The trust would ensure that your assets are protected and properly allocated." "Allocated to what?" "Well, to your care, of course, and to ensure the family's financial stability so we can continue providing that care." I set the papers down carefully. "I see. And if I were to become seriously ill or need long-term care?" "We'd handle all of that," Patricia said quickly. "You'd never have to worry about nursing homes or anything like that. We're family." I nodded slowly, as if considering their generous offer. "This is quite a commitment you're making. Taking care of an aging parent can be expensive." "We've thought about that," Hugo said. "The insurance policies we've arranged would help cover any major medical expenses." Insurance policies. The death benefits they had purchased with my own money, naming themselves as beneficiaries. "Hugo," I said quietly, "how long do you expect me to live?" The question caught him off guard. "What do you mean?" "I mean, when you're planning for my financial future, what timeline are you working with? 5 years? 10 years? 20? Hugo and Patricia exchanged glances. "We hope you'll live a long and healthy life, of course," Patricia said carefully. "Of course. But realistically, you must have some expectations. After all, you're asking to take control of assets that I spent 40 years accumulating. You must have thought about when you'd be free to use them for your own purposes." The room went very quiet. Hugo's professional mask was starting to slip. "Mom, we're not thinking about inheritance or anything like that. We're thinking about your well-being." "My well-being?" I picked up the papers again. "Hugo, do you know what I was worth before I moved in with you 3 years ago?" He shook his head. $167,000 in savings and retirement accounts. A paid-off condo worth $85,000. No debt whatsoever. I looked up at him. "Do you know what I'm worth now?" Hugo's face had gone pale. $62,000 in savings, no property, $8,400 in credit card debt that I never incurred, a personal loan of $15,000 that I never applied for. I smiled sadly. "In 3 years, you've reduced my net worth by over $200,000. Patricia started to speak, but I held up a hand. "But here's what's interesting. I spent the past 2 weeks reviewing every transaction, every account, every loan. Do you know what I discovered?" Hugo was staring at the table, unable to meet my eyes. I discovered that you've been playing a very sophisticated game. Not just stealing from me, but systematically destroying my financial independence while making me grateful for the privilege. I stood up slowly. The question is, what did you think would happen when I figured it out? Patricia's mask finally slipped. You're not going to figure anything out, Hilda. You signed those insurance policies. You agreed to the account transfers. You moved into our house voluntarily. Legally, you're just a confused old woman who made some bad financial decisions. The honesty was almost refreshing. That's an interesting theory, I said. Unfortunately, it has some problems. I reached into my purse and pulled out a thick folder. For instance, the insurance policies I supposedly signed? My financial advisor had a handwriting expert analyze the signatures. They're forgeries. Hugo's head snapped up. That's impossible. The credit cards I supposedly applied for, they were requested from a computer in this house, using login credentials that I've never had access to. I opened the folder. The loan applications? Same story. Patricia was on her feet now. You can't prove any of that. Actually, I can, because while you've been playing your game, I've been playing mine. I spread documents across the dining table. Bank security footage of you using my ATM card. Recorded phone calls of Hugo authorizing transfers from my accounts. Credit card receipts from restaurants and stores that I've never been to. Signed with forged versions of my signature. The silence was deafening. But the most interesting evidence, I continued, is the recording I made of our conversation 3 weeks ago, when Hugo admitted that you were waiting for me to die so the debts would disappear and you could inherit whatever was left. Hugo stood up abruptly, his chair falling backward. You recorded us? I did, along with several other conversations where you discussed your financial planning strategy. Very illuminating. Patricia's face was flushed with rage. You scheming old bitch, you played us. I smiled. I learned from the best. What do you want? Hugo asked desperately. Money? We can work out a payment plan. What I want, I said, moving toward the front door, is for you to understand something important. They followed me, both talking at once, making offers and threats in equal measure. The woman who collapsed in your living room 3 weeks ago was broken and defeated, I said, turning back to face them. She was grateful for whatever scraps of affection you threw her way. She would have endured anything to maintain the illusion that you loved her. I opened the front door and stepped outside, but that woman is gone. She died the moment she realized that her own son saw her as nothing more than a financial resource to be exploited. Mom, please, Hugo said, real desperation in his voice now. We can fix this. You're right, Hugo. Someone can fix this. I pulled out my phone. The police will be here in about 10 minutes to serve you with fraud charges. The district attorney is very interested in your case. Apparently, financial elder abuse is a major priority for them this year. Patricia lunged forward like she wanted to grab my phone, but I stepped back calmly. The house will be seized as evidence, since it was purchased with fraudulent funds. The cars, too. The country club membership has already been canceled. It turns out they don't appreciate members who commit identity theft. Hugo's legs seemed to give out. He sat down heavily on the front step. Where will we go? Patricia whispered. That's not my problem anymore. I looked at Hugo. This man I had raised and loved and sacrificed everything for. You taught me an important lesson, Hugo. You taught me that blood doesn't make family, and family doesn't give you the right to destroy someone who loves you. Sirens were audible in the distance now. I'm 65 years old, I continued. If I'm lucky, I have 20 good years left. I'm going to spend them with people who actually care about me, doing things that make me happy, living in a place where I'm valued for who I am, not what I can provide. The police cars turned onto our street, and you're going to spend the next few years learning what it's like to face consequences for your choices. Hugo looked up at me with tears in his eyes. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. For a moment, I felt the old tug of maternal instinct, the urge to comfort and forgive and make everything better. Then I thought about the note he had left beside my unconscious body. The casual cruelty of abandoning me in my moment of greatest need. The calculated theft that would have left me destitute if I hadn't discovered it in time. I know you are, Hugo, I said gently. You're sorry you got caught. I walked away as the police cars pulled into the driveway, and I didn't look back. 6 months later, I sit in my new apartment, a bright, cheerful place that I chose and paid for with my own money, reading the newspaper over coffee that tastes better than anything I had in 3 years of living in Hugo's house. The criminal trial is scheduled for next month. The civil suit to recover my stolen assets is moving forward. Hugo and Patricia are living in a small rental apartment across town, both working retail jobs to pay their legal fees. I could feel sorry for them, I suppose. But I don't. Margaret visits every Sunday, and we're planning a trip to Europe next spring. Something I always wanted to do but never felt I could afford. Now I realize I always could afford it. I just never felt I deserved it. My phone rings occasionally with calls from Hugo, messages from Patricia, attempts by distant relatives to convince me to forgive and forget for the sake of family harmony. I don't answer, because I've learned the most important lesson of my life. Sometimes the greatest act of love you can perform is refusing to let someone continue hurting you. And sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the freedom to walk away from people who see your love as weakness. I'm 65 years old, and for the first time in my adult life, I'm exactly where I belong. Free, independent, and surrounded by people who value me for who I am, not what I can give them. It took a collapse on a hot summer day to wake me up. But once awakened, I discovered something Hugo and Patricia never expected. I'm much stronger than they thought, and much more dangerous than they ever imagined. The matriarch has finally learned to protect herself, and that changes everything. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.